This video is brought to you by Letsynthesize Academy, the #1 place for practice-oriented courses for serious music producers.
Yo, the Larson here, welcome to the Neurosynthesize Sunday episode. Ever had that moment where you crafted a sick Reese bass, moving, full of characteristic, gritty, but somehow it still wasn't hitting hard enough? I've been there. I cranked the overdrive, tweaked the EQ, stacked layers, but it was missing the raw aggression that makes a bassline truly dominate the mix. Then I found a little trick, one small effect that takes your Reese from mean to absolutely savage. If you want your bass to not just sit in the track, but tear through it, stick around. Yes, like always, you can grab this project from my Patreon below with millions of others, and click here for my academy if you want to learn a lot more about music production. But right now, let's jump into it. Awesome, now before we start recreating this really heavy bass, this Reese bass, I want to show you something, my favorite trick that I always use basically. So I have this weird bass. Sounds kind of bad on itself, but I resampled it, I cranked the transposition up by 21 semitones, and obviously added an EQ to chop off the lows and the highs. I added a really short delay and a saturator to add it as a layer that sounds like this. Sounds like almost a metallic Foley sound, a percussion sound, but all together, and especially in the mix, sounds so good. Cool, so right now the main bass sounds like this. Just a simple saw, but for a good Reese bass you want to have something on the high register. And so good in Vital, you can choose this inharmonic warp style, warping mode. And if I crank this up, we get some really nice higher overtones. Then the next one that I love to use is an extra sub. So as you can see, it goes directly into the effects, or you can route it directly out. But the main point is I don't want to route it through the filters because I'm going to filter this stuff heavily. So what I want to do is focus a lot more on the mids and mid-lows. You can use, for example, a bandpass filter, but I like to use low pass and the high pass filter separately so I can fine tune that short and narrow band that I want to use. But before that, let's add a little noise to it. And then we can filter basically the main oscillator, oscillator 1. So as you can see, I'm just using oscillator 1 as the filter input. But on filter 2, I'm using filter 1 as the input, and I high pass it with a really high resonance. And that is so good because if you start distorting and heavily, that we are going to do, it can increase some awesome higher overtones. So I bet you can already hear that we have some really nice resonance at around 300 Hz that is going to be important. Right, so before the distortion we need some extra voices. That always sounds good before distortion because it makes the sound a lot more grittier. And the linear fold is my favorite along with the sine fold because that can create an awesome growly tone. So not just a squash to the ceiling kind of sound, but an awesome gritty tone to it. Then I like to focus a lot more on the mid-range, so at around 1K I added this scoop. And as you can hear, we're already having a really nice tone, like the fundamental is done, that is really strong on the mid frequencies. But I'm actually cutting the sub 2 a bit, but this is actually important because we're going to focus more on the mid lows, and after the process, the distortion, it will come up anyway, so we'll have to fix it using an EQ after distortion and stuff like these. Cool, so the fundamental of the sound is done, and the first thing that I want to add is a saturator to crunch everything to the ceiling, so make the sound as loud as possible. Now my favorite thing to make the sound as gritty as possible and growly as possible, as I said previously, is the wave shaper mode with this curve that almost looks like a sine curve. So in Saturator you need to click on the wave shaper and crank up the curve and try to have this sound. But we created awesome grit to it. Alright, we need an OTT. But I had to add some final output and tweak the band outputs to match the final sound that I'm looking for. So if it is not enough, just crank up the mid-band output. Okay, so after the OTT we always need some saturation, because the OTT basically messes up the whole frequency spectrum, the frequency layout. So we need to make sure that everything is topping the ceiling again. Right now it is time to clean up the whole mess, but the most important part here is not only clean up the mess, but also shape the sound so we can boost and we can cut at the same time. Right, so this is why this EQ8 is here right before the wave shaper, because if you boost some frequencies or cut some frequencies, obviously the wave shaper will react a lot differently. So this is why I want to add some more boost on the tops to embrace, you know, the noise, and also a little cut at around 700 Hz. And a little boost at around 500 Hz to embrace that weird frequency range at around 500 Hz. That's cool because the wave shaper based on the 500 Hz boost will create extra higher overtones. Right, but after distortion we always have to clean up the sound. So this is why after the OTT I boosted the lows a bit, but cut the mid lows at around 150 and 500 Hz that we just boosted previously, I know, but that was because of the distortion. So distortion created some nice extra overtones based on the 500 Hz boost. But after distortion and compression we need to clean up the sound and make everything smooth and easy to listen to. So as you can hear, it's definitely too loud on the 500 Hz range and the high cut that we always do. Okay, so because I don't want to have a really busy and chaotic EQ curve, I'm using another EQ8 to boost the sub, especially before going into the saturator. Just check the difference. A lot more grit. And also we need to cut a little at around 1K because it's just... The difference is subtle, but there are some weird frequencies. Let me show it to you. I just wanted to cut this frequency range. And another cut at the very highs and it will boost at around 800 Hz. Right, so we have the final sound that already sounds good, but I don't know, it's just not perfect. It misses something. So here is the trick that I wanted to talk about today. To embrace it, we need an audio effect rack with high and low frequency bands. So we are going to use an EQ8 to chop the frequency spectrum into two bands. So on the low band, I'm using an EQ8 cutting at around 500 Hz and another one, obviously on the high band, at around 375 Hz. So right now we haven't changed too much, but here comes the trick. If you apply a frequency shifter on the top band, and it is important to put it before the EQ8, so the frequency shifter is going to have some really heavy low frequencies. And it's good because based on the low frequencies, obviously the frequency shifter will have different output too. So if I pull it back drastically, like around 2.4K, this is the sound that we get. So without rack, it's okay, but the audio effect rack creates some weird artifacts basically that sound so good on this type of bass sound because the low end is untouched. What I'm doing now is taking only the top band and I'm frequency shifting it down, having a lot lower in pitch and also in quality sound only on the top bands, while the sub and the mid lows are untouched. But there is one more thing we haven't made because this sound is good, but it's still quite static. So let's go back to Vital and apply an LFO on the low pass filter because the main sound, the source sound, is quite dull. So as you can see, we just filtered everything below 56 Hz. And if we start moving the cutoff just a little up, we're going to have a lot different sound. So I'm using LFO1 to move the low pass filter just a bit. So you can hear, and I bet you can see that The whole sound changes by just a tiny amount of low pass filter movement. Now let's do the same on the high band of the EQ. Adding a little more tops as it goes higher with the low pass filter. So as the low pass filter opens up, we add a little more tops using an EQ, messing up the whole sound only on the higher part of the modulation. And to make it even more interesting, let's apply a pitch drop effect using LFO2. So I'm just modulating the voice transposition inside the matrix here. So right now this is what we get. So the whole beat just got together, forming this awesome little clip. Okay, so go to my Patreon, grab this project with millions of others, and click here for my academy. See you guys next time. Peace.